Hey everybody, this is Brad Dyke reaching out to you, and this is my second video I'm doing for today. And this one's a little offbeat because as an operations director, one of the most important things you always have to remember from operational side is your data centers need to stay up and running. Hence, you develop strategies to survive the worst, tornadoes, weather systems, and so on and so on. But also, operations personnel know that you never put your eggs in one basket. You need to diversify your resources so that you can have a business continuity model, which is better than having a disaster recovery model, in my opinion. And let me cover those details for you real quick. Disaster recovery means something terrible's happened, and a data center was destroyed. With everything on hands, everybody on board, you have no intellectual resources on site, it's gone. So your backups, which you hopefully have somewhere else, will have to be restored somewhere else, and you'll have to stage your systems and get them operational, usually within a 24 hours time period so that you're not penalized by your customers. Business continuity models are different. What those are is you have a certain amount of your cluster environments, your application environments, dispersed between two or more cloud providers, or your own data center with a cloud provider, or a multi-hybrid environment, which would be a combination of 3 different levels of complexity. But the point is, at least 50%, or I would say 25% of your business continuity failover would be somewhere else. And that meant the database was replicating over to that location on a 30-minute window, and so on and so on. And you never went down, you just lost 75% of your processing power when your primary site was taken down. But I saw this video, and I've seen a couple of videos, and I just think billionaires. All right, so the topic in this video is about billionaires building nuclear fallout shelters. Okay. 35 years of experience of dealing with environments and keeping them operational. You know your limitations. And as an operations person, you also know your expectations. So you have to apply the same thing with a nuclear fallout shelter. The biggest problem with that idea is triple-folded. Biological. Then you have what's called sustainment. And then you have what's called recovery. Now, if you understand the nature of keeping something operational, even in the worst case scenario, you know that you have to set a planned date. In other words, you know you're only going to last so long. You only have so much fuel in the tank. When those generators go down, you're down, but you've done everything you can to prepare for that, and you do your best. That is not the case with fallout shelters. I happen to be ex-military. I have a great set of knowledge in regards to a lot of that kind of stuff. I've been in the environments. I know what it takes to survive in the woods and the dependencies at which we have in environments. Plus, I have a lot of experience with health and immune systems, and because I've had to fight that battle myself for 5 to 6 years. And also, I understand the nature of what we call hardware. So, if a billionaire spends, 30, 40, 50 million dollars on a nuclear fallout shelter, he is basically providing a glorified grave. Right, you heard me. He's building his own mausoleum. And it's principalized on 3 primary things, which I've already gone over. Let's start with bio. Bio is a very important detail with the human body, that it is part of this environment. And when you have a nuclear fallout winter and you have deviation means basically that the biome, or the biologicals in the environment of our atmosphere, are altered. When we're present in the environment, we're altered with it. So we have the least amount of histamine response, and also bodily functionality response. Now, these functionalities can be very severe. It can be from massive amounts of infections in the eyes, the ears, and the mouth, the orifices of the body, basically, to diarrhea to, dehydration. It's your body trying to synchronize with a caustic environment. When you take yourself out of that environment, you put yourself in a vacuum, or in this case, a highly secured, recycled process environment. You are putting yourself out of your biome. So what that means is, as you're in there, let's say a year or 2, 3, or 4 years, you're at a significant risk of becoming extremely sick, or just flat out dying. Now that's the first problem. The second thing is the biologicals. The biologicals are the necessities you need to have: air, nutrients, inbound, outbound, the bacteria biome of your local environment, and the specifics you need within those elements so that they're healthy as well. Now, what am I talking about? Well, if you've ever drank a glass of distilled water, you would say, oh my God, that's terrible. And then you go and be sick, because distilled water has nothing in it. It's just H2O. The water that you drink from the tap or from the bottles of stores or from the streets, water supply systems, are nutriated water sources. In other words, they have mineral content in them. It can be as significant as iron sulfates to other types of minerals, hence the term mineral waters and so on. So, yes, you could reprocess your own water, but you have to have an environment that's flexible and able to renutriate the water itself so it's proper to drink. That is a very complicated science. And, unless you've got a well that taps, 10,000 feet straight down and pulls water from the ground, which is very difficult to do when you're building a bunker, because the well itself doesn't constitute that you get water. But if you're lucky, let's just say you're lucky, and you put a 10,000 foot deep well reserve down there, and you can pull up this well water. 10,000 feet will give you about 4 years of water before you start incurring some of the water recycled from the atomic environment, or the bombed out apocalypse above the earth. The factor is there, it's a set limit of resources. In other words, you're going to be constantly monitoring your water for basically enucleated water, or in other words, radioactive water, which then you would have to distill that into water and separate the compounds, isolate the compounds, put them safe somewhere so they won't affect the inhabitants, and then you would have to renutriate the water after you distilled it to make it drinkable, palatable, and worth even having. With that, you have the second component in there, and that is you. Your biome, in other words, your skin, the air you breathe, the interactions, and the secretions that come from your own body. That is basically, you're living in an aquarium on the earth. And when you restrict the aquarium, and you restrict some of those functionals, those bacteria, good and bad, then you begin to develop deficiencies against that, which means that if you do encounter that biome again, because it's evolutionized constantly, but you've stepped out of that evolutionary process because you're not out in the open air like everyone else is, you're inside a shelter. And then what happens is you start to have significant dermal related issues. You might have complications with digestion and so on and so on, because remember, we're in a biome, we're in a homogeneous environment, and those things help us, and there are other things that help us keep those things in check, and so on and so on and so on and so on. There's a giant war of bacteria and viruses and everything going on in our environment today as is, and when you strip yourself of that environment, you become susceptible to the new versions that you're not used to. Okay, so we've covered the biologicals. You can go a lot more into food and stuff like that, but I wouldn't do that. This will go into the next thing, and that is your capacity. In other words, how much space do you really need if you're going to survive a nuclear holocaust? Well, we're talking 100 years. Okay, so to be real. I mean, if you're in a partially irradiated area, it might be less. Let's say 50 years. But everything upstairs is going to be pretty bad. We know that because we look at Fukushima. I think I pronounced it right. But the Japanese reactor in Japan that went critical. We also have Chernobyl and, of course, 3 Mile Island. They give us very clear indications that it's going to take a long time. So that means you have to have a very large, interrelated bomb shelter or atomic fallout shelter. It's not a shelter. It would have to be a very large warehouse with environmentals. Environmentals mean heating, cooling, light, water controls, humidification problems. You've got to be on top of that, or you have mold, mildew, critical situations very quickly. And you have to have a warehouse of these resources. Your food has to be dried, and you probably will also be forced to have some frozen or high freeze foods. In other words, they're at a very, very, very cold temperature, which will allow you to keep the foods for many, many, many more years. But to have all of that, you've got to have that building as part of your bomb shelter. And, it's a warehouse, and we're talking it's 100 feet out, 75, 100 feet wide. And it's got all the things you need. It has the electrical systems, it has the lighting systems, it has the power requirements to keep it all good, because you got to keep that food cold, and you got to keep the air right, and you got to keep the humidity under control, so that environment is as ambient as possible. Now, with that being said, there are still problems with food, specifically fresh fruits. So that means you're going to have to also have some type of botanical garden or a biome gardening system set up where you can get yourself some fresh foods, and that soil will be critical to you to survive. Again, talking about biome, which will introduce a lot of headaches to the rest of your environment unless you can keep it completely isolated in their own environment so that they don't exchange air, which is very difficult to do because bacteria travel on you, and you would have to completely wash yourself down and keep all that inside the garden area, so none of that good stuff for the garden, which is bad stuff for the warehouse, stays apart. So you see the complexity? Now, with that being the case, let's say you got a 100 foot by 100 foot size warehouse. It's like 50, 60 feet tall, and you've got your stacks of everything in there and your food and all of that. Now you got to look at your home. Well, the dirtiest thing in your world is you, humans. So in data centers, we've learned that kick them out, get the humans out of there. But in this case, you don't have that situation. The truth of the matter is you have a human being, and a human being produces waste. The skin, breathing, excretion, urination, consumption. All of those things generate overhead. And then you have the care and take, which means you've got to have a sink and a disposal and plumbing. And you've got to control how that plumbing is handled very carefully, because you just can't pump it outside, because that's the way for the outside to get into you. It has to be a real sanitary system. And you've got to keep it what's called negative pressure effect, so that the pressure of your home is greater than the sanitary system and pushes all the bacteria away from you. Not counting the bacteria that you're creating on your body. Now, remember, I told you about biome? Well, your environment, your home, your bedroom, your workstation, kitchens, and all that you have, it's a challenge, because if it's just you, if it's just you, the billionaire, you're in trouble right up front. After 100 and 150 days, the psychology of the environment is going to come on you. So your environment has to be built for the psychology of a human being, which means you're going to have to put in environment interactions that bring you sunlight, force, things like that you can't see anymore, and bring you some normalcy in your daily, weekly, monthly life cycle. Now, with that being the case, if you're just taking care of your warehouse and all the stuff that needs to be balanced correctly, and grow your foods and you have a few moments of peace in your house, you've got to sleep and you've got to wash yourself, you've got to eat, and you've got to figure out ways to entertain yourself. Now, with that, entertainment is crucial, and it can't be frivolous. There's two reasons. One, it can't be a giant library of books. That's more space you've got to build out for. Though it is valuable to have certain books, you also have to have equipment. Computers, basically, with oodles and oodles and oodles of storage, because if you're the only one left, you're going to have a library of everything you need to start over for you, and if you have family, for them as well. So most likely you'll have a few books like your Bible and true classics and things like that are condensed, smaller format, but are there for you to provide you something you can pick up and read on an occasion. But the bulk of your resources should be within your terminal and your computer systems. But that leads us to the third part. I know IT equipment. I know electronics. I know solid state electronics, and I know microelectronics. If you have computers, LCD displays, keyboards, mice, and all this kind of stuff in your environment, you're going to have more of them. Probably significant numbers. LCD displays have kind of a general life cycle. So that means your display screens have got to be in fairly good quantities so that you can replace them over time as they wear out. The same problem happens with SSD drives. It's not if, it's when they fail. Because SSD drives, those are the latest version of storage, by the way, have a defined end date. So they're only going to write and read so many times until they stop. That's bad news. So you have to have redundancy in what you have in your environment, and you got to have backups to replace the ones that die. Now, this is no joke, because this is a multiplier going all the way down to your generators. So your generators cannot run more than 20 or 30% efficiency, because if you hit them any harder than that, that means, basically, for clarification, you don't want to run them any more than 30% output, basically. Why? Because just like with cars, normal residential cars, most cars drive within a 25 to a 40% threshold of the engine's capacity, allowing the engine to last as long as possible. That same strategy applies to our data centers with their diesel engine systems, and would apply to a bunker platform environment. That bunker environment would have probably no less than 3 active diesels that are in phase. That means that they each come on in sequence as necessary to really spread out that 30% workload as much as possible. You could potentially have solar backups, but you'd have to go out and maintain the solar environments, and that's not an easy process. And anything mechanical that would do that cleaning for you, you better have spare parts for again. And again, you still have to go outside to fix the problem. So solar isn't a very good answer to that. Wind is the same situation. Windmills will only work as long as they spin. When they fail to spin, then you're dead in the water, and you got to go out and check them out. Not good. So with that being the case, that's not a good solution either. So diesel generators or thermal electric response systems. In other words, you tap into the earth heat system and you generate electricity that way, or use what's called a thermal crystal combination of electricity. But again, anything you have to have more parts of it. You have to know how to work with them, to repair them. And you need the literature and documentation, because you're not going to remember everything. You're going to forget stuff, and you need to fall back to that. And again, to have stuff, you need spare parts. To have spare parts, you need to have space. You need the warehouse. You see how a domino effect is? So, at best, a atomic shelter or a nuclear fallout shelter has the feasibility of providing in just a few years of effective protection at risk. So what does that at risk mean? Well, unless you're circulating the air in and allowing the biomes and the other variables of your atmosphere to come in and circulate within your bomb shelter, and somehow managing to keep the radiation out, you're not going to be very healthy when you come out of that box, you or your family. You have to take these things into consideration. So, as operations would say, there is what we call a delimitator that tells us stop. So when you are looking at having the equivalency of almost like a shopping mall size bunker, it's just gotten out of control. And that doesn't mean, it doesn't even talk to transportation. And again, if you have ATVs or if you have a truck or a car or something like that, you got to have backups, because after so many years, things are going to break and you need parts, right? Same situation here as well. So if you had a helipad, because you're a billionaire and you can fly in and fly out and you can do all these things, the only problem with all of that, again, is the same problem. Accessibility, being outside, which is not a good thing, and at the same point in time, when you do want to use that helicopter, will it power up? Will it function? Are the batteries dead and totally out of commission? They have to replace the batteries. Batteries do not do well just sitting around for 20 years. You'd have to really learn how to work with more like lead acid batteries, where you could reconstitute them chemically. But again, you got to keep the supplies for that and the spare batteries for that. It stacks on top of each other. That delimitator is being reached, is basically what's happening. So you spend a true, genuine fortune for an environment that is really not that effective and only has a certain very limited lifespan before it's just not good anymore for you. So it's not a good answer. So my recommendation, I'll never call anyone a fool, because the good Lord says don't do that. You can say somebody's doing something foolish. That's okay. And I think I understand the fear of me being an operations person, the fear and concern of not being prepared. It's real. It's legitimate, and you need to take actions. But to build an atomic nuclear fallout shelter to provide for you and yours in a nuclear holocaust that would at minimum be 200 years before any normalcy could ever return, it won't work. Basically, in a nutshell. It would be a great experiment to try, but unless you build your own mini Earth, the problem with that is you couldn't leave it. You would have as much immune deficiency as a child who has no immunity at all and has no immune system. That's the disparity of this. So my recommendation for the millionaires and the billionaires out there is, don't make this mistake. Don't give up on the human race. Planning for the end. There's so much in the middle. And it's kind of dark. And if you really want to go there, you can go there, but you go there by yourself. Just like all the other people who have done that. And it's kind of tragic. My suggestion is, use your wealth in other more practical ways that boost and support your communities. De-escalate the need for conflict. In today's world, there are those who want to have conflict, and there are those who know how to stop conflict. And when those two meet, you have wars, real wars, and there are a lot of penalties. But people who are very well off can make contributions to help to promote de-escalation, denuclearification, weapon systems, and just kind of get to a better place as a human race. I'm Christian. I openly admit that. I have no problem with that. But I really don't have a conflict with my Jewish and my Islamic counterparts, because I can't feel that I should have respect if I can't respect their desires to have their religion. Now, with that being said, I do believe in a semi-caustic kind of way, we can work this out. And I believe that as long as we keep faithful within our hearts and remember what it meant to be ethical and moral for the right thing, so that the wrong thing never surfaces. And launching atomic weapons is the wrong thing. When people who don't have those values, that greed and the desire for power are their values, then that's a real problem. So I would suggest, instead of pursuing such a thought as, how do I protect me and mine, realize we're all on this planet together. And because we're all on this planet together, it is a neighborhood. And as long as we start to learn to respect each other better, we can get ourselves in a good place. It's not an easy fix. It never was, and never will be. But the good Lord put us on this planet to take care of this planet, to make it our own. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't, right? But when it comes to investing into building a nuclear fallout shelter, my strong recommendation is save your money, invest in your communities, invest in your children's futures. And if you don't have children and you've got all this money, my suggestion is take some time, make yourself kind of like a pauper or appear like one, get out in the real world and see people for who they are, really who they are, beyond the dollar value or the status value. Just see people for who they are and have your own adopted children to want to wish a good and positive life with. It's not a bad idea. The alternative is pretty doggone dark and pretty horrible. So you think it out your way, and of course, as all millionaires and billionaires are being successful as what they do, you could probably be just as equally successful here. What a novel idea, right? Well, this is Brad Dyke saying, sorry for the off-topic discussion, but I thought it was really entertaining to see how some of these nuclear fallout shelters kind of came over into the IT environment stuff that I do. And I'm saying, you're wasting your time. Don't do it. Just invest in people and community and help make your communities and your governments and your countries better instead. Well, God bless. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.